Welcome to this presentation on disaster cost reimbursement for nonprofit organizations by Vicki McGinnis, Director of Operation OC, the Disaster Response Program of the Orange County Rescue Mission. Vicki will share with us what she learned spearheading a successful effort to coordinate reimbursement applications from more than 40 nonprofit organizations involved in flood cleanup in Orange County in 2010. Vicki's passion for disaster response began with a 2006 trip to New Orleans to assist in the Katrina recovery efforts, and grew through training with Hope Force International and 2 more trips to the Gulf Coast to serve in Hope Force and Salvation Army recovery work. As the Director of Operation OC and Chair of Collaborating Organizations Active in Disaster Orange County, Vicki's desire is to maximize the community's access to resources by creating a bridge between faith and community-based organizations and governmental agencies in Orange County. Vicki's presentation was recorded at a meeting of Santa Barbara County VOAD on June 5th, 2012.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and really an honor to be invited to share my experience with you. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Operation OC so that you get a background for our response to the December 2010 storms. Operation OC is a program of the Orange County Rescue Mission. That might seem like an odd pairing with disaster response, but in reality, the Rescue Mission is addressing the needs of people in crisis on a daily basis. Operation OC addresses the needs of people in crisis due to a disaster. So it is similar. In addition to our work directly with volunteers, we also facilitate a partnership of about 50 organizations now, most of those faith-based, Christian churches and ministries. We also have representation from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, social services, and we're about to get the healthcare agency on board. Their representative was on vacation yesterday when we had our June meeting. But we're looking forward to that. Building those relationships within the county really helps us be able to bring more resources to the community when the disaster event occurs. I also have the privilege of chairing COAD OC for this year, and I serve as the sector lead for both the faith-based and donations management sectors. So whereas Operation OC is Christian organizations and churches, then we pair up with all the faith-based groups through the COAD. The rain, December 2010, and I know you were affected here in Santa Barbara County by this storm also. There were actually 13 counties throughout the state that were impacted by this storm. And the rain started falling for us on December 17th. By December 21st, the county had issued a local emergency proclamation, and things just kept getting worse. Within 5 days, our local canyons received 22 inches of rain. And most of that fell within 36 hours. So it was a pretty intense rainstorm, as you can see there. When morning broke, this is what they saw. During the middle of the night, about 3:30 in the morning, the residents reported hearing thunder, but it wasn't really thunder. It was boulders tumbling down the roads. Everything had been dislodged from the hillsides with all that rain. So that scene there, that's normally a dry or very bucolic little Santiago Creek. Not exactly the same there. And it was going to be a very different Christmas for the canyons. This bridge normally has 5 feet of clearance under it, but that's the amount of debris that came down the hillsides. So a week after the declaration or the proclamation, the Orange County Sheriff's Department Emergency Management Bureau called upon COAD OC for assistance. There's a group out in the canyons called the Inter-Canyon League, and they're kind of a hybrid between a community association and a disaster response group. They had volunteers coming out into the canyons to help with the debris removal. But this little community doesn't really have a lot in the way of resources food-wise for people who don't live there on a normal basis. So with all the volunteers coming in, that put them in a little bit of a predicament. So their request to the Sheriff's Department was that they somehow find help to feed the volunteers. So that was the request that went out to COAD. Can you help us feed the volunteers up to 150 a day? So when I got that call at Operation OC, I broadcast that to our at that time, 40 plus organizations. And we had one of our partners step up and be ready to deliver 100 sack lunches the next day. However, we got rained out. So it was quite an interesting little adventure. So we scheduled them for a subsequent day. In the meantime, the needs were rising. Now the request was, do you have debris removal teams? Can you provide plastic sheeting to cover the hillsides? What about heavy equipment, hand tools? So all the coordination work that was going on at the beginning of this and then all through was actually the piece of the work that was reimbursed by the state. All of this was coordinated through the Sheriff's Department. That's a really important piece to remember. We'll talk a little bit later about the written agreement that should be signed between any nonprofit organization and a local or state agency. And one of the major stipulations is that we don't self-deploy. We respond to a request from that local or state agency to do the work that they have specifically requested. So the morning of December 30th, bright sunny day, we were actually out in the canyons with debris removal and assessment teams. And for the next 2 weeks, we were out on almost a daily basis with the debris removal and lunch delivery. The only thing that interrupted it was rain. So we had a few days that we weren't able to respond because of the rain. After 2 weeks, the canyon residents really started to get a bit tired of just daily dealing with this, and they decided it would work better for them to make this a Saturday event when the big teams came out. Still small groups came out during the week, no lunch delivery during that time. January 4th was the end of the rain event, so to speak, but our recovery work continued for another 2 months into early March. When we arrived, we asked the Intercanyon League where they wanted us to serve, and this was the home they directed us to. This is the home of Connie Carter. It was suffered the most extensive damage of the 170 sites that were identified in our canyons. When the creek overflowed its banks, it followed the road. The road turns right above Connie's house, but the water and mud did not. And it ended up in her backyard, and you can see where it even overtopped her roof. And this is the view from inside her house, looking out. She and her family were able to escape in the middle of the night. They had enough warning to get out of the house before the mud encroached. December 30th, our first day out, this is one of our Operation OC volunteers through Friends Disaster Services. And she is surveying Connie's newly remodeled kitchen that now needs to have tons of mud removed. And this is very wet, heavy mud. Actually, the outcome was the subflooring had collapsed and the house was not recoverable. And Connie actually is a building permit expediter, so you would have thought she'd have all the right connections, but just too difficult to overcome that. But we were responding to where the community said they wanted help. So after a few days, the Sheriff's Department stepped out of the coordination piece, and we worked directly with the Intercanyon League, just keeping the Sheriff's Department apprised of all the work that was being done. So this documentation piece is really important when it comes to the reimbursement process, and we'll show you some of the paperwork for that later on. Incoming volunteers, and these were all pre-scheduled volunteers, would all arrive at the Silverado Community Center, sign in, and then they were shuttled by Intercanyon League members up to the various work sites. The roads are not all that passable on a regular day, but with all the debris, it was just not practical for everyday vehicles to be navigating those roads. So, what did that recovery work look like? Well, this is New Year's Day. How many of us were out working on New Year's Day? That's normally a day to relax, sit back. Well, these are two of the faith-based sector members of our COAD working together in the canyons. It's Mormon Helping Hands and Tzu Chi Foundation, which is a Buddhist group. A week later, Tzu Chi is still out there doing a bucket brigade to empty a home of mud. And the picture on the right shows another one of our Operation OC partners, Focus OC, removing mud, getting it away from the house by moving it down a chute that was developed to get the mud further away from the house so it could be transported out of the canyons. Another one of our partners is Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa. Paracletos International is their disaster response group. They came with 40 volunteers, the hand equipment and heavy equipment with a licensed operator. So you can see it goes all the way from no skills required to licensed operators. Well, as you know, volunteers of all stripes are essential during a recovery effort. Now, that plastic sheeting that they requested, that went into covering the hillsides because there was more rain predicted, and we needed to prevent the hillsides from tumbling down even further. This was the Mormon Helping Hands group out there. They had a team of youngsters, and boy, you can see them up top right-hand corner. They had to scale that hill and then drape the plastic down. Throughout the recovery period, Operation OC partners were providing lunch, whether it was prepared hot on site or cold sandwiches prepared in the kitchen of the church or someone's home and delivered to the site. The volunteers always appreciated that. And oftentimes, the volunteers preferred that the food be delivered to them on site. They really didn't want to leave the location they were working at. But if they chose to come into town, they came back to the community center where they had signed in the morning, and lunch was provided there. Now, January 21st, we were a full month from the local emergency proclamation when we got the state proclamation. And then 5 days later, we had a federal disaster declaration. Unfortunately, even at $45 million in personal property damage in Orange County, that did not meet the federal threshold for individual assistance, which meant there would be no federal funds to assist these folks, and they would need the faith-based community and others to come in and help them continue this recovery process. This was one of the more interesting jobs out in the field. Remember I mentioned the thunder that the residents heard? It was the boulders tumbling down the roads. Well, some of those boulders ended up in the drainage culverts, which resulted in more flooding. So Calvary Chapel West Grove, True Hope International is their disaster response group, another one of Operation OC's partners. And they were clearing the culverts by hand. You can see they have a 2x4 to try to clear some of the debris out. But they also brought that heavy equipment and licensed operators. So it was, again, all levels of expertise to help in the recovery work. Now, this group in particular contributed 1,280 hours of volunteer labor to the effort. They did not want any reimbursement. So there's another benefit to that. If they are truly donating time and equipment, that can contribute to the local and state cost share for the reimbursement they receive, the state from the feds, the locals from the state. There's a cost share involved, generally about 25% that the local or state government has to pony up for their recovery efforts. And our donations from the nonprofit organizations can match that. For instance, Joplin was the first time that this was really brought to bear. They had over 72,000 volunteers in the recovery efforts in Joplin, and over 500,000 hours, volunteer hours contributed. That totaled $17.7 million toward the cost share, which, as I recall, completely met the cost share. The local and state governments did not have to contribute any actual money toward the recovery effort because of that from the volunteers. Now, our True Hope group not only brought the volunteers, they came out several times with groups of 30 to 40 people and the heavy equipment. They also provided a 50-foot trailer to hold the household goods from the homes that had been inundated until the homeowners were able to move back in or establish a new residence. They brought out an 8-foot trailer to hold all the dirty hand equipment overnight at the community center. And those trailers stayed on site throughout the recovery effort. Now, as I mentioned, there was hidden work going on behind all of this, and that was the coordination. Operation OC was scheduling all the debris removal teams, scheduling the groups providing food, and all of this being coordinated with the Intercanyon League. They had actually established an ICS structure. They had a volunteer coordinator. They had a logistics section chief. So it was very well organized. All of this was documented most of it by email, but if you have a phone call, you want to follow that up with an email as printed documentation.